Chapter 1106, was it him? After a tragic battle, the crowd of Gao Tianwu brothers finally killed all the mutated cockroaches. However, for this, they also paid a heavy price. Gao Tianwu was covered in blood, with a dozen or so marks on his body from being slashed by the cockroaches, and even a piece of flesh was torn off his shoulder. Xiao Guang was beaten and disarmed from his Autobot state, lying on the snow frozen with purple lips. It was only thanks to Frog's protection that they weren't eaten by the swarm of cockroaches. On the contrary, Frog was intact. Those giant cockroaches looked terrifying, but in Frog's eyes, they were nothing more than some large-sized bugs. That Bugmaster lost the giant cockroaches he had worked so hard to cultivate, and inwardly, he knew that he was not going to survive today. An oozing smile came out of his mouth. It seems that this time my operation has failed. Master, it was my incompetence. He raised the sword in his hand and viciously stabbed himself in the chest. Just then, a bullet penetrated his dry wrist, stopping his final strike of feeding the cockroach with his flesh. In the void, Zhang Yi walked out with an expressionless face, and he was followed by Yang Xinxin, who was wearing zhou qi as well as a black Lolita outfit, and Yang Xinxin was holding the sleeping flower in her arms. Zhang Yi. The Bugmaster was shocked, although his mouth was hanging, but when he really saw Zhang Yi, he wasn't even a fart. Yang Xinxin stroked Flower's fur, and behind her, a six-winged angel slowly emerged. The 3 pairs of wings were 3 different colors. Red represented love and lust, black represented abhorrence, and blue represented judgment. The angel of lust opened his bow and took a red-colored feather, then shot it into the Bugmaster's chest. In an instant, his eyes that were bent on death changed completely, and he was as meek as a sheep, looking at Yang Xinxin with eyes full of infatuation. Zhang Yi told Zhou Qi to go ahead and heal the injuries of the School of Wu doors. Everything that happened here today, he had actually seen in his eyes. After all, nowadays, Zhu Zheng had long ago given him the satellite control of Tianhai City. Any movement that happened on the ground here was within Yang Xinxin's grasp. From the very beginning when the battle happened here, Zhang Yi was watching. He didn't rush to make a move, but rather, he wanted to see if these people, Gao Tianwu, had any value to cultivate or not. As it turned out, they were indeed young enough to have ruthlessness and hustle. For Tianhai City, which was currently depleted of talent, it was indeed a good stream of fresh blood. Flower jumped over and pressed a claw directly onto the Bugmaster's head. Boom! His body was pressed directly into the snow. Yang Xinxin and Zhang Yi walked up to him, and Yang Xinxin opened her mouth to inquire, "Who the hell are you? Why are you messing around in Tianhai City?" Without any hesitation, the Bugmaster told the truth and told the truth. To love someone was to give unreservedly. "My name is Richard, I was a compounder. My master ordered me to come here and create trouble for Zhang Yi." Yang Xinxin and Zhang Yi exchanged a glance. Master? By the looks of it, this Bugmaster was also just a minion. And the one behind him was the real mastermind behind the scenes. Your master, who was it? Yang Xinxin asked. The Bugmaster slowly uttered a name. When Zhang Yi heard the name, his eyes were filled with dismay. It was him. This name was not unfamiliar to Zhang Yi. It was just that he did not expect, no matter what, that person would still be alive and would come to Tianhai City to take revenge on him. Zhang Yi frowned, puzzled. He really couldn't imagine why that person would come back. And on what basis did he dare to go against him? Take him back and interrogate him properly. Pull out every useful piece of information from his mouth. Zhang Yi said indifferently. Flower's size instantly grew larger and slightly disliked the Bugmaster. This fellow, all of his smell was nauseating. Zhang Yi turned around to meet Gao Tianwu and the others. They were quite seriously injured at this moment, and if they did not receive timely treatment, they would definitely die quickly in this kind of weather. However, when they saw Zhang Yi coming, they were still holding on strongly, waiting for Zhang Yi to come over and say something to them. Zhang Yi nodded as he looked at the group of young men with resolute gazes. You guys did a good job this time. I will cure you all and give you a generous reward. Gao Tianwu, however, shook his head. We don't want a reward. Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows and smiled. Don't want a reward? Then that means you don't think I'm giving me enough? If a person said he didn't want anything, it was definitely because he wanted more. Gao Tianwu did not deny it and said very frankly, Mr. Zhang, a few of our brothers want to follow you. Zhang Yi snorted. Follow me? You guys? Yes, us. Zhang Yi took a deep breath. Your strength is still too poor to be of much use following me. But seeing as you guys are so dedicated to your work, I was able to arrange a place for you to stay. As for the future, that will depend on your performance. Although Zhang Yi did not explicitly say so, the meaning in his words was already willing to let Gao Tianwu and the others follow him. However, the implication was that whether or not you could go further in the future and achieve a higher position in Tianhai City would depend on your subsequent performance. The Gao Tianwu brothers' faces were filled with excitement. Many thanks, boss. Zhang Yi waved his hand. Don't call me boss, it's better to call me Mr. Zhang in the future. The title of boss, how does it sound like a social mixer? I am a scholarly man, reading spring and autumn. No matter what, Zhang Yi agreeing to receive a few of them was good for Gao Tianwu and the others. Zhang Yi planned to arrange them to Chaoyu base. After all, it was along the coast and was now the most important defense base in Tianhai City, but it was also the weakest among the three major bases. However, Zhang Yi was significantly more interested in the frogs. He had been observing this battle from the beginning to the end, and the frog was obviously very strong, yet there was always a sense of laziness. Rib bit. Since things have been settled here, I also plan to go back. Gao Tianwu, feel free to come over and find me sometime in the future. The frog patted its snow-white belly and said with a smile. Gao Tianwu froze for a moment. Are you still planning to go back? Is it bad to stay in the big city? We can make a career together. The frog shook his head. No, compared to being in this, I prefer rolling around inside the pond. The fish, shrimp and loaches inside the pond are frozen on. It saves me the effort of looking for food, Ribbit. He always had a happy look on his face, bouncing and jumping in an extraordinarily pleasing manner. Zhang Yi smiled and said, the pond you stayed in is too small, there is a heron river in front of my doors, how about you go there? There are a lot of fish there, and of course, loaches too. Chapter 1107 Animal Musicians. The frog scratched his head. He was a very easily satisfied frog, so having a small pond was enough. But who could resist the temptation of a whole river? So after thinking about it for a while, and with Zhang Yi's strong invitation, he nodded his head and agreed to go back with Zhang Yi piece by piece. Zhang Yi was planning to leave this expert bug catcher behind, so that in the future, it would be convenient to deal with any more pest disasters in Tianhai City. What's more, he felt that the frog's potential was very good, and there was a lot of room for growth in the future. After some discussion, Zhang Yi took them back to his shelter. This was the first time that Gao Tianwu and the others had been to Zhang Yi's shelter. Nowadays, this place was one of the most luxurious shelters in the entire Huaxu Kingdom. Even if it was Zhu Zheng, the supreme commander of the Jiangnan region, his house in Blizzard City was only of this caliber. A huge and gorgeous villa with four-season heating. When they stepped into the thick alloy doors, the Gao Tianwu brothers and Frog were dumbfounded. The feeling of warmth and even some heat that suddenly swept through their bodies was too unfamiliar to them. Zhang Yi had prepared a change of clothes for them, but they were still told to change into their hospital gowns first and receive treatment from Zhokir. After all, fighting with that filthy cockroach, their bodies were inevitably infected with many kinds of terrible viruses. But all of these were just minor problems for today's Zhokir. With sufficient medication, coupled with her doctor abilities and rich medical experience, she quickly bandaged them up and then injected them with medication. This comfortable environment strengthened the resolve of Gao Tianwu and the others to follow Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi could see their inner thoughts. Then he said to them, nowadays, I have 3 other bases under me, and although the internal environment is not as good as here, it is still suitable for survival. I will send you all to one of the bases next. You have to rely on your own hands and strive for a higher status. Now that it was the end times, there weren't that many complicated relationships, even if you weren't anyone's relative or child. As long as you were capable enough, you would be able to climb up. A good material life, reputation, status, women, all this is within your reach as long as you are strong enough. A few people were overwhelmed by Zhang Yi's words. These things, inside that tiny village, was something they wouldn't even dare to think about. I've given you guys the opportunity, let's see if you guys can do well on your own next. Zhang Yi still gave them some supplies, but not too much. It wasn't because he was stingy, but if these people went to Qiaoyu base with too many things on them, it would be easy to draw attention to them when they first arrived. Anyway, after going to Qiaoyu base, they would have no worries about food and clothing in the future, and this opportunity could be more valuable than any more supplies. While Zhang Yi and Gao Tianwu chatted with the others, Frog was hobnobbing with Flower and Totoro inside the house. The frog seemed to have a natural affinity, which simply meant that it was a social cow and could get along with anyone. He could blah 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 for half a day while Flower lazily slept on her back in the cat's den in front of the fireplace. However, when he learned that Totoro could actually play the flute, his big eyes burst into an unbelievably bright light. Whoa! Were you a human mutation as well? The Totoro had a dumbfounded look on its face, clearly unable to understand the frog's words. After being picked up by Zhang Yi, Zhou Qi and the girls had studied the Totoro for a long time, but they couldn't figure out what kind of species it was. Unable to determine this, there was even no way to develop an animal translator in a targeted manner. But the big guys weren't in a hurry. The Totoro's character was very docile, and although it possessed a high supernatural ability index, it seemed to not be good at fighting. Keeping it at home as a pet would also be able to enrich the atmosphere of the shelter. Frog surrounded Totoro, looking left and right. Suddenly he pulled out a harp from underneath the folds of his belly and played it on the spot. Totoro listened silently, and shortly afterward, even had a heart-to-heart, pulled out his beloved bone polished into a flute, and put it to his mouth to follow the chorus. This ensemble caught the attention of everyone in the entire shelter, and everyone was especially curious to come to the living room to watch the fun. Frog lifted his harp and bounced on the floor, while Totoro played quietly, closing his eyes. Such a scene was exceptionally harmonious. Zhang Yi nuzzled and nodded. I can't believe that there are still musicians in my family. Saying so was actually not rigorous enough because Yang Xinxin, along with Zhou Qi, Yang Xia, Zhou Haimei and the rest of them all knew how to play musical instruments. However, in terms of singing, it was a bit poor. Yang Xia did have a masterpiece, but it was impossible to listen to it without a tuner. After the song was finished, the frog's eyes were filled with excitement. Ribbit! You blew really well. Totoro opened his mouth and made a sound similar to that of a deer. Yang Xinxin walked next to Zhang Yi and said to him, the Totoro can play music, it might be a mutated human as well. Let it spend more time with this big frog, it might be able to stimulate its memories. Zhang Yi nodded, makes sense. Anyway, even if it's useless, it's good to hear them play. We do have a band here. Yang Xinxin laughed, and it was an animal band. Zhang Yi stayed with Gao Tianwu and the others, setting up another round table in the room and having a nice meal together. In the afternoon, Zhang Yi asked Lu Dehai to send a car over to pick up Gao Tianwu and the others to Qiaoyu base. He instructed Lu Dehai a few times, telling him that these were talented people and that he should make good use of their talents. Lu Dehai himself was promoted by Zhang Yi, and after Zhang Yi personally gave the word, he of course agreed with his mouth full. By the way, recently over the coastline, are there any unusual movements? Zhang Yi casually asked. Lu Dehai sniffed and a look of hesitation appeared on his dark face. What's wrong? Zhang Yi saw his hesitation and asked with a smile. Lu Dehai hurriedly said, Oh, Mr. Zhang, it was like this. Recently, 2 of our fishing boats that went out to sea for fishing did not return after going out to sea. Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow. Was it a big ship? Lu Dehai shook his head. No. Recently, due to being on guard against the insect plague, we didn't dare to go out to sea for fishing on a large scale. So it was just some small boats that caught some fish and shrimp in the offshore area to supply daily consumption. Zhang Yi took a deep breath. I see. It is always risky to go out to sea for fishing at such a time. You guys just act as usual in everything. Lu Dehai nodded in response before leading Gao Tianwu and his group towards Chaoyu Base. Chapter 1108 Muyan. Zhang Yi and Yang Xinxin arrived at the place where the Bugmaster was being held. This guy's strength isn't that strong, at the top it's only Delta level, and according to the destructive power of his abilities, it's probably just 6000 to 7000 points. But his personal battle power is almost completely nil. But the guy standing behind him might already have the strength of Epsilon's level. Zhang Yi said indifferently. The standard of judgment was very simple. Since the other party dared to make a move against Tianhai City, he must possess considerable strength. Otherwise, not to mention Zhang Yi, even the people around Zhang Yi would not be able to defeat him. However, the fact that the other party was still fearful meant that his strength had not yet reached a level where he could sweep everything away. However, if the other party's strength was able to reach the level of Black Tortoise, he was afraid that he would be rushing to Tianhai City to wreak havoc. Looking at the Bugmaster who was looking at Yang Xinxin with a face of infatuation, Zhang Yi stroked his chin. Although this fellow has been captured, but how are we going to make the one behind the curtain show up? That fellow was a huge threat if he wasn't taken out. A smile appeared at the corner of Yang Xinxin's mouth. Brother, let Xinxin solve this problem. She looked at the Bugmaster with some disgust. After my power was raised, my control over others was even stronger. For a mutant of this level, my control can be maintained for 24 hours. It is entirely possible to utilize him to feed false information to the other party to make him strike. Zhang Yi looked at Yang Xinxin curiously, like what? Since the other party knows that I'm around, it's easily impossible for them to make a move, right? He said helplessly, even if I pretend to leave Tianhai City, my ability was originally spatial, so no matter how far away I am able to quickly return to Tianhai City. Yang Xinxin's eyes lit up with a wry arc. Since there's no way to leave a loophole for the other party above space, let's lay out a layout from the inside. Zhang Yi blinked. What was that about? Yang Xinxin said, let's just say that Sister Kur is pregnant with a 9-month baby and is about to give birth. Zhang Yi, pfft. His eyes widened. That's okay? Yang Xinxin looked at him and said calmly, imagine if your woman is having a baby at home right now, do you still have the heart to fight? The other party was a cunning fellow and would definitely not let this opportunity pass. Zhang Yi nodded, thinking carefully. The plan Yang Xinxin said was indeed good. What you mean was to let him go back and tell the Black Hand behind the scenes this news. But will he believe it? A cold expression passed over Yang Xinxin's face. That advice is just as good. I'll have this loser die immediately after finishing the information. The mastermind behind the scenes might doubt the loyalty of his men, but he would never have imagined that his men would give their lives to deliver false intelligence for his enemies. Zhang Yi thought deeply, that would make sense. Not to mention that person, even if it was me, I'm afraid it would be hard to be suspicious to this extent. Yang Xinxin whispered, but there is still another problem. If we lure that person out, are you able to kill him, brother? This time, it was Zhang Yi's turn to have a confident smile on his face. As long as the preparation is sufficient, let alone that person coming in this Tianhai City. Even if it was Black Tortoise and Cardalus who came, I would still be able to kill them. Even the top mutants were just humans who had become powerful, so they were bound to have loopholes. Zhang Yi never fought unprepared battles. Timing, right place, right people, these 3 conditions, as long as they were fulfilled, even the most powerful opponents could possibly be defeated by him. Yang Xinxin smiled and nodded, all right then, let's arrange it like this. Zhang Yi pondered for a long while and said, half a month, we need such a long time to make preparations. Just let him live for now, then continue to create mutated cockroaches and pretend that nothing happened. After half a month, I will prepare everything and then wait for him to take the bait. A stern glint flashed inside Zhang Yi's eyes. Trying to move his base camp, that was violating his most intolerable scales. That guy, he had to die. For the next half a month, there was little news in Tianhai City. The Bugmaster had been completely controlled, and Yang Xinxin ordered him to continue creating an army of cockroaches to inflict on the 3 major bases. As for the arrow of love and desire, when his ability was about to disappear, Zhou Qi injected him with a drug, causing him to fall into a deep sleep. As for Zhang Yi, he was starting his work. The first thing was that after absorbing the Morning Soul's origin, he had to transform the power into his own. Adapt to the new power and put it to good use. The second thing, on the other hand, was that he used Space Shuffle to sneak into Blizzard City one night. The night was already deep, and the Night Raven Squad's captain Spirit Guardian, Mu Yan, wearing only a black nightgown, had already fallen asleep. This usually cold and indifferent captain of the 3-0, but the room was decorated in a pink color scheme. The princess's hammock and various dolls filled the room. It seemed that only through this way could she get a trace of the coziness that she had lost a long time ago. After the end of the world, she had lost all her family, and her friends had changed one after another in the process of wandering. Nowadays, she was used to seeing the ugliness of human nature, and had long since closed her heart, no longer trusting anyone. Suddenly, an invisible dimensional gate opened in front of her bedroom bed. Crack! Bang 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 bang! A very light sound, it was the rattling of shoes stepping on the wooden floor. Mu Yan's eyes opened in an instant, her eyes were a godless icy blue color. She was blind, originally unable to see anything. Yet, as a result, she had awakened a special supernatural ability that allowed her to sense everything around her. It was because of this ability, and her other ability Shadow Wielder, that she became the captain of Zhu Zheng's Shadow Scouting Unit Night Raven Squad. Tongue. Mu Yan rolled over, her elbow coming straight at Zhang Yi's doors. The thin moonlight reflected through the window in the middle of the room, and wearing only a black lace nightgown, her white calves emitted a glistening light. It was me. Zhang Yi spoke faintly. Mu Yan's figure suddenly lurched in midair before she quickly retracted her attack, only to fall onto the bed because of this action. Zhang Yi didn't turn on the lights. At this time of the day, all the lights in all the houses were out, so if he suddenly turned on the lights, he would be easily discovered instead. He hugged his arms and sat down on a chair. Mu Yan smoothly picked up a black ribbon from the table and covered her eyes. Captain Chaos? Just call me Zhang Yi, this is not work time. Okay, codename Zhang. Zhang Yi took a deep breath. It was fun to have a little skin, wasn't it? The corner of Mu Yan's mouth hooked into a smile, if anything, seemingly a bit pleased. Zhang Yi touched his nose. Sure enough, women were all the same, very vindictive. Chapter 1109 Tsunami. Mu Yan sat on the bed and did not rush to change her clothes. Perhaps it could be said that she couldn't change her clothes right now either. After all, she didn't wear anything underneath her pajamas. Zhang Yi said, "Sorry, it's the first time I came to your home, so I didn't find the living room." "Don't worry about it, I didn't see anything." This was the truth. Mu Yan's voice came out coldly. How could the famous Zhang Yi be a womanizer? As long as you wave your hand, throughout Blizzard City, I don't know how many women would scramble to throw themselves at you. However, she curled up her calves and clasped her hands around her knees, her gaze seeming to be able to look at Zhang Yi through the layer of black veil. "What is it that you want to do when you visit so late at night?" Zhang Yi laughed. "A bright man does not speak in the dark. I would like to ask you to do me a favor and go with me to Tianhai City." Mu Yan frowned slightly. "Ask me for a favor? Do you still need to ask me for a favor?" She was greatly confused. As an emergency addition to the Jiangnan region's battle force, her strength level wasn't high, and she could only utilize her special abilities as the captain of a scouting unit. Zhang Yi was so strong that he would use her help? Zhang Yi said indifferently, "Every person is a screw, it won't be useless, just not put in the proper position. For this matter, I need to utilize your abilities." Mu Yan recalled how her request to follow Zhang Yi was rejected back then, and couldn't help but raise her chin slightly. "That wasn't what you said back then." The smirk on Zhang Yi's face intensified. is this considered arrogance on your part? A blush unexpectedly appeared on Mu Yan's cold-as-ice face. No, she said coldly. Zhang Yi said in his heart, if there wasn't, you wouldn't be in such a hurry to retort. But he didn't say it out loud. Women were creatures of the mouth, and to break it down at a time like this was a foolish thing to do. Well, are you going or not? He asked simply and bluntly. Mu Yan thought about it and suddenly asked, you originally only needed to go to Commander Zhu. He gave the order, I will definitely go. Why, did you have to come late at night to find me? Zhang Yi looked at her, I don't mind owing you a favor, but I don't want to owe Zhu Jing a favor. In fact, this was also a test for Mu Yan. The first time Mu Yan made a request to follow Zhang Yi's heart had been moved. But he could not guarantee Mu Yan's loyalty. So this time, Zhang Yi was going to see if she was willing to go against the rules of Blizzard City for him. Blizzard City was fully militarized. Without a transfer order from the headquarters, no one was allowed to leave without authorization, especially these powerful mutants of the investigation force. As expected, Mu Yan was in the midst of contemplation. She was also well aware of what Zhang Yi's purpose was in doing this. After a long time, she pursed her lips. If I leave with you, can you let me join your team? There had always been a fear in her heart. With the ice soul implanted in her, sooner or later, she would be absorbed by Zhu Yu and become sustenance. And looking at the entire Tianhai city, only Zhang Yi could protect her safety. Zhang Yi said indifferently, just this one thing is not enough to make you stay by my side. But it will increase your points in my heart. So go or don't go, consider it yourself. Mu Yan pursed her lips. Zhang Yi's caution made her melancholy. However, Zhang Yi suddenly spoke, regardless of whether you can join my team or not, you've done me a favor, and I'll remember this favor. Then no one in the entire Jiangnan region will be able to touch you, not even Zhu Zheng. Mu Yan raised her head fiercely. This was what she wanted the most. Without any hesitation, she directly nodded her head this time. Okay, I promise to go with you. The corner of Zhang Yi's mouth revealed a smile. Everything was within his grasp. Then you should change into your clothes first. He walked out of the doors, which caused Mu Yan to slightly lose her heart. If there was a chance that she could gain Zhang Yi's trust, she didn't mind offering herself. But it was obvious that Zhang Yi would not eat food from unknown sources. He was a frequent player of Battle Royale type games before the end of the world, and he had seen many men who had suffered in this regard. He couldn't get himself into trouble because of a moment of gluttony. Who knew how many sweetheart babes heading for darkness there were in this world? Mu Yan changed into a full set of combat clothes before following Zhang Yi, and just a few short minutes later, they arrived in Tianhai City. It was late at night, and the lights inside the shelter were brightly lit. Everyone wasn't sleeping, but was waiting for something to come. After Mu Yan arrived here, Zhang Yi introduced some of Mu Yan's identity to them. Although everyone in the family knew about this spirit guardian captain, they still couldn't help but feel a bit wary when they found out that she was a young, pretty, and trippy girl. Yang Xinxin glanced at her watch and said indifferently, according to the time, Sister Kur, you should be working hard inside the maternity ward at this time. She said, glancing at Zhou Qi. Zhou Qi, greatly speechless, stomped her foot and turned around to head towards her room. Zhang Yi invited Mu Yan to sit down on the sofa in the living room, and Yang Xia poured her a cup of tea. Please do this next. Late at night, it was already midwinter, and it snowed almost every day in Tianhai City, and it was a big, big blizzard. The people of Chaoyu Base had already entered the underground shelter, closed the heavy doors, and then slept in the still warm environment. But deep in the ocean, there was a dark tide. The dark ink-like seawater was constantly undulating in the middle of the storm, as if there was something pushing the waves. The waves were getting higher and higher, one layer after another coming towards the coastline of Tianhai City. Right underneath the pale sea, a huge and terrifying shadow swiftly swam towards Tianhai City. Rumble rumble dash, the waves looked like just a layer of black lines from afar, but as it gradually approached the coast, it slowly became terrifying. In the end, it directly turned into a tens of meters high monstrous wave that pressed against the coastline of Tianhai City like a mountain. The Chaoyu base's alarm was suddenly loud, and everyone was awakened. Lu Dehai rolled over and climbed to his feet as his men came to report, "Chief, the tsunami is coming." Lu Dehai was dumbfounded. A dozen kilometers or so of the offshore area had been frozen. How could a tsunami come so easily under these circumstances? He shouted, "Quickly, everyone gather at once." Chaoyu Base was underneath the harbor and had excellent waterproofing, so if there were no accidents, it wouldn't be affected by the tsunami. But at a time like this, no one would joke with their lives. As for Lu Dehai himself, he was the first to report the situation here to Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi was sitting on the sofa and had been drinking coffee to refresh himself. After hearing Lu Dehai's intelligence, he looked out the window, and on the distant coastline, thunder rolled in the sky, and the thunder was like a sharp sword, constantly splitting down. The mountains are not pristine, the sky and the earth are united, the winter thunder vibrates and the summer rain and snow. It was winter now, how could there be thunder? Zhang Yi took a sip of hot coffee, his eyes flashing cautiously. "He's coming." Chapter 11:10 Three-Headed Dragon. The waves pressed down like a wall towards Tianhai City, and there was some sort of terrifying existence churning the sea water in the middle of the huge deep sea, and it was the one that triggered this terrifying tsunami. The scale of the tsunami was so large that it could even flood half of Tianhai City. The entire coastline of Tianhai City would all be destroyed. Amidst the high walls of the huge waves, the terrifying monster opened its scarlet eyes, shadowed, with 6 eyes like 6 huge searchlights, hundreds of meters high like a titanic beast that was going to destroy the world, making people shudder. "Zhang Yi, I will destroy everything you cherish today. Even if I can't kill you, but you can't protect everyone around you even if you can escape, right? All of this was the consequence you deserve for causing me to become like this in the first place." The giant beast in the seawater let out a low roar. Rumble. The tsunami rushed up the coast, instantly flooding everything on the shore. Chaoyu Base urgently closed all the hatches, even though it was a carefully crafted doomsday shelter that could withstand a huge tsunami. But under the impact of this huge wave, the shelter was also shaking in the middle of it, giving people a horrible feeling that it would collapse at any time. Lu Dehai was already sweating profusely. This kind of power, even though he was a mutant, it was no different from an ordinary person, and he could not resist it at all. One could only pray that Zhang Yi would be able to resolve this crisis. Roar! From the midst of the tsunami, a huge and hideous and terrifying black monster suddenly rushed out and roared up to the sky. Hundreds of thunderbolts struck down in the sky, recklessly destroying all the buildings visible to the naked eye in Tianhai City. The tallest pearl tower was struck by a bolt of lightning, and it instantly cracked from the neck, and the pearl on top of its head fell down with a loud crash. The monster's bloody eyes looked into the distance, the shelter by the Heron River, which was his ultimate goal. "Zhang Yi!" The monster roared in rage, the terrifying pressure rushed straight in that direction, the sea water rolled back and invaded in that direction impartially. And behind the monster, a dozen warships suddenly appeared, following the monster. The ships were clustered with thousands of pirates, raising their weapons in the middle of the storm and letting out wild cries of excitement from their mouths. At the end of the waves, a figure suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Zhang Yi's gaze was calm as he hovered in midair, his figure was so small compared to the tens of meters high waves in front of him. But in the face of the terrifying waves, he simply raised his hand, and thousands of huge dimensional gates directly blocked before the waves. Wow! And invisible doors completely absorbed the seawater, not giving them a chance to rush towards Heron River at all. In the middle of the shelter, the frog felt the terrifying heavenly might and stared wide-eyed at the huge monster that was unfolding its form in the distance. Ribbit! He took out his harp and played a musical tune amidst the wind and thunder, and Totoro also took out his flute to chime with him. The sounds of the wind, thunder, and the instruments were surprisingly intertwined into a haunting symphony. Shokir stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and calmly said, "Everyone, please let's guard this home today. Behind her, everyone in the shelter stood with serious expressions before nodding vigorously. They had prepared for this day, but when they saw the tsunami that was as terrifying as an apocalyptic calamity, everyone's heart still couldn't help but stir. Soon, everyone came to their posts and prepared for work. Uncle Yu and Lu Karen went to a control room on the second floor and started preparing to operate the guard weapons that Lu Karen had spent a lot of time preparing. Above the sky, under the darkness of the night, Zhang Yi looked away from the monster in that dark sea. His voice spread out through the loudspeaker of his combat suit. "It's been a long time, Sky Dragon King. I didn't realize that you're really still alive." The monster that appeared here was no other than the Sky Dragon King, who had been pitted badly by Zhang Yi on top of Star Island and was almost killed by the soul loss. For a moment, Zhang Yi thought that he was dead. As a pirate leader, he was so self-absorbed that he tried to compete with several major powers for the source of God. This could not be described as bravery, it could only be considered a death wish from Zhang Yi's perspective. And later, after Star Island had gone through a great battle between several epsilons and whatever creatures from beneath the abyss had shown up, Zhang Yi felt that it was impossible for the creatures on the island to survive at that time. Not to mention that Sky Dragon King had already been seriously injured by the soul loss. However, he did not expect that he had not died and had come back to seek revenge on Zhang Yi. Moreover, at this time, the Sky Dragon King was far more powerful than he was back then, and could even be described as terrifying. Judging from his ability to induce a tsunami, today's Sky Dragon King had already advanced to the realm of Epsilon. How in the world was he able to do that? Could it be that underneath Star Island, there's still a source of God that I haven't discovered that he's gotten? When did Epsilon start to suck as well? Zhang Yi's heart let out this sentiment. Nowadays, the Sky Dragon King had completely changed his appearance, his size was even bigger than it was back then, and he was no longer in the form of a diamond armor dragon. Instead, it was a monstrous dragon that was covered in black smoke and had 3 heads. That kind of aura was very familiar to Zhang Yi, and it was almost exactly the same as the black armored monster that appeared in the abyss back then. When the Sky Dragon King saw Zhang Yi, an even more blood-red glow emanated from its 3-headed eyes. "Zhang Yi!" He roared, his voice filled with hatred in it, unable to imagine how one had to hate someone to be so angry. At this, Zhang Yi could understand. After all, the entire Sky Dragon Pirates was sort of destroyed in his hands. Killing Kanuta and Nerit, pitting the Sky Dragon King with one hand on Star Island, and almost letting him die. This kind of hatred was not shared. Sky Dragon King. You are now a mutant of the Epsilon realm, everything you lost in the beginning can be recovered. You can reorganize the Sky Dragon Pirates and restore the glory of the past, even more flourishing than in the beginning. And why bother coming over to me to fight for your life? Let's talk, shall we? Zhang Yi did not wish to fight an Epsilon to the death. Although he had already judged the strength of the Sky Dragon King and was prepared for it, anything that was dangerous, he wished to avoid. However, Sky Dragon King did not appreciate this in the slightest. You shut up. Ruined. I have been completely ruined by you. You were the one who caused me to become what I am now, there's no going back, nothing is going back. The only reason I came back here was to drag you to hell with me. Zhang Yi frowned. He did not understand the meaning in Sky Dragon King's words. Destroyed? Wasn't becoming an Epsilon a good thing for the Sky Dragon King? Why was there not a trace of joy to be heard from his tone, but instead, it was filled with the despair of destruction? It looked like there must be some major secret hidden behind Sky Dragon King's ability to survive on top of Star Island. But right now, the only way to slowly reconsider those issues was to resolve them first.